So let me just center I'll just block out Ike here. Sorry, Ike. Just block him out so we can just see his tie. Yeah, it looks like I'm wearing a tie. So the question many people began to ask during the Vietnam War was, well, what's the purpose of being in Vietnam, which is 10,000 miles away? Was it really Homeland Security? Was it really defense of the realm? Or was it was good for business? And had the war become just that, good for business, good business, basically? Certainly Herr looks at the cultural destruction of the Vietnamese way of life in South Vietnam, and he sees slavery, and which is an early form of globalization, right? Because we're shifting over from colonialism to globalism, but we haven't quite arrived there yet. Thousands of Vietnamese in the service of a pyramid, this is in the South, that wouldn't stand for 5 years, plugging the feed tube into their own hearts. So this is this brutal sort of image of, consumer capitalism, which has been brought to Vietnam, which has no protection against it whatsoever. I mean, they're just, and so he's plugging the feed tube into their own hearts, grasping and gorging young Americans in from the boonies on a TDY, which is temporary duty travel. This is like a day pass or a 2-day pass, so they're just down to Saigon, to see a bar girl, drop some money and go home, go back to the boonies, charged with hatred and grounded in fear of the Vietnamese. Because after all, these guys have just been in the boonies, that is in the bush, fighting the Vietnamese. Now here they come down to Saigon, same language, looks like the same people. They're enraged. I mean, and so the number of prostitutes who are murdered and the rapes, it's just like, you can imagine. Thousands of Americans sitting in their offices crying in bored chorus. You can't get these people to do a fucking thing. You can't get these people to do a fucking thing, on page 39, because why would the Vietnamese do a fucking thing? I mean, basically they're kind of waiting for the end. They're hoping the Americans will win the war, because if it falls on them to do it, they're not united and they're not true believers the way the North Vietnamese are. Famously, Herr calls it and sees it and identifies all the way in which the war is utterly immoral. And so on page 60, he says, it was like turning up in the middle of some black Looney Tune where the duck had all the lines, right? So here's, when he says black here, he doesn't mean African-American. He means dark. It's like it's a black satire. It's the worst, the darkest kind of satire you can imagine. Like Gulliver's Travels, is this brutal satire. Some satire is kind of kind, not this. So the duck here, he's not mentioning Daffy Duck by name because he can't be sued, right? So basically, Daffy Duck has all the lines. Like Daffy Duck is the sane one in this story. I only jumped in once when I heard a doctor bragging that he refused to allow wounded Vietnamese into his ward. Jesus Christ, I said, didn't you take the Hippocratic Oath? But he was ready for me. Yeah, he said, I took it in America. Now, this is just so important and will be important for us when we come to the Linda Van Deventer and Susan O'Neill readings, which will be next. And we talk about women. But so American doctors were ready, for the claims that they basically had stopped ethical behavior entirely. So here's this guy who says, I don't let the Vietnamese into my wards. I won't treat them. If they die, so be it. And he says, didn't you take the Hippocratic Oath? The Hippocratic Oath has been modified. There's a sort of caregiver's oath now. It's been, it's greatly longer and so on. But all doctors, when they graduate, are sort of sworn into this. They have had this read to them. And the Hippocrates is a Greek, is considered to be the first doctor. He wasn't, obviously, because there were thousands of years of doctors before the Greeks arrived on the scene. There were doctors in the Middle East, there were doctors in South Asia, there were doctors all over the place. But anyway, this is the doctor that the West goes, there's the beginning of medicine in the West. It's like, must be the first doctor. Anyway, Hippocrates was this guy. And to the Hippocratic Oath has nothing to do with being a hypocrite. They're not related. So the Hippocratic Oath basically begins first, do no harm, because one of the things that you have to instill in doctors is that they must save lives. And it doesn't matter what the politics of the patient are, whether you hate them or love them or think they're human beings or not, you're going to save their life. That's the deal, right? That's the Hippocratic Oath, and that's how it begins. Or that it begins with this kind of if it doesn't begin that way particularly, it begins with that general sentiment, which is basically first, you do no harm. So the first thing you will do as a doctor, if you're going to be trusted, is, because you would be the perfect one to do it, is you're not going to kill the patient deliberately or by accident in any way. You are not going to bring harm to the patient. So first, do no harm, although it may sound like, how is that? It's like, it's a very big thing, because what you're saying is you will only treat if you can help. And if you can't help, you will not do anything. You will not do harm to the patient. So that's a lot, right? But this guy was ready, he says, but he was ready for me, right? Yeah, he says, I took it in America. In other words, O's I took in America, stay in America. This is Vietnam, which is completely specious. There's no, it's like saying, well, I became a Christian in America, but, over here, I'll kill who I like. It's like, whoa. You're a Christian there, you're a Christian here. So the idea that the Americans are the good guys and those dirty Vietnamese are soulless communists started to take a bit of a beating, as you can see.